And this is our agenda for today. And first, I will do a little welcome, and then John Chen, the Executive Director of PCDC, will deliver open remark. And then we are honored to have Mrs. Chen to give us her statement. And also, we are happy to have Councilman Squilla here with us. And then we will hear community perspectives and law enforcement perspectives on this incident. And following that, we will have time for question and answers. So I would like to welcome John Chen, Executive Director of PCDC, to do a little introduction of PCDC and Chinatown's history. Oh, and just a friendly reminder, this is a diverse community with different perspectives, and everyone is welcome, and we hope everyone's open-minded. And in order for everyone to be heard, we ask that you keep questions limited to 2 minutes maximum. And the goal is for our community to be aware of the important issues happening in this neighborhood and to have opportunities to be engaged. And we are recording this meeting, and we'll take notes on what's discussed today and share back with the community and decision makers. And so, John.
Good. Thank you, Yue. Thank you. Welcome everyone to this meeting this morning. This meeting is a very serious about a very serious issue among people of color, specifically in the Asian American community here in Philadelphia. We have a slate of speakers, some who are experts on hate crimes and ethnic intimidation, some who are experts on civil rights, and then the experts who are the community people and the residents of Philadelphia, who are the victims of hate or friends or relatives of victims who have been on the receiving end of hate. It is a very unfortunate time that we live in today. I think since the arrival of Asian Americans, the first Chinese Americans in this country, there has been ethnic intimidation. And today, with the COVID-19 and with the rhetoric coming from Washington, D.C., it is a sad day that the bigots in our society feel they have free license to assault, abuse, and attack people who are Asian Americans. So today, as you have said, we would like to open up this forum and invite perspectives. We want to hear from people. And we've invited the District Attorney's Office and their representatives to attend today. And to begin with, why is PCDC hosting this community meeting along with our community activist partner, Anna Pern, who's also a resident of Chinatown? PCDC's mission is to protect, preserve, and promote Chinatown. It's a pretty broad mission statement. However, we have always found ourselves not just only focused on Chinatown and the people of Chinatown, but the broader greater Philadelphia community. We are very focused and invested in the issues of Asian Americans in this region. And when there are issues that are controversial, and when there are issues that harm the Asian American community, PCDC is here and wants us to be involved. So that is the context in which we are hosting this meeting here today. With that, I would like to introduce our moderator, who is Anna Pern, and she will moderate this meeting today. And I will actually ask her to begin and introduce our upcoming speakers.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you to PCDC for generously hosting this event. We just wanted to, again, thank PCDC for convening the community, as it has time and again, in good times and in difficult times for our community. And I wanted to acknowledge, that District Attorney Krasner is here, as well as members of his staff. We are lucky to have Council Member Mark Squilla, State Representative Mary Isaacson, and Congress Member Dwight Evans will be joining us later today. And just before we start, I also want to acknowledge members of Philadelphia Police Department who have been really instrumental in supporting and working with us throughout this really challenging time. So as John mentioned, there has been a long history of anti-Asian violence. In fact, Philadelphia Chinatown was sort of birthed through, someone named Li Fang fleeing anti-Chinese hatred from the West Coast. He arrived in Philadelphia in 1870 and set up his business here. And through the years, PCDC has had to help our community, grow and weather challenging storms. And so to the right on this PowerPoint slide, for those who are joining by phone, you can see an image of a crane, tearing apart a building, and advocates, including some who are still on this Zoom today, defending our community. So we have a very tight schedule, and we're very lucky to have civil rights attorney Shiwen Law join us today. Shiwen Law has a long history of activism, union organizing. He's a champion for many people in the community, but he has also experience in representing people on ethnic intimidation. And so we wanted to invite Shiwen to kind of briefly explain the definition so that we would all have a shared understanding of what ethnic intimidation is and what hate crimes are. So Shiwen?
Thank you. And thank you to PCDC and the others for inviting me today. So the ethnic intimidation statute, which has been around for many years, looks at whether a person has committed an underlying criminal offense and adds to that if there is proof of malicious intention towards the race, color, religion, or national origin of another individual or group of individuals, that the severity of the offense will be increased by 1 grade. So it doesn't have a separate charge. I mean, it doesn't have a separate offense or sentence by itself. It just increases the severity of whatever the underlying charge is, which is whether it's an assault or a terroristic threat or some other criminal charge. And what we've seen over the years is an issue as to what constitutes malicious intention towards the race. Is it something that is said in the course of committing the crime, or is it, expressions of hatred before the commission of the crime? And in instances where there have been other factors that could have caused the person to have animosity towards an individual based on race, color, religion, or national origin, many times the courts will say, well, there is an other reason, and therefore ethnic intimidation is not the primary reason. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has settled that matter and said that it does not have to be the only reason for the underlying for the underlying crime. So that in the case of Commonwealth versus Daniel Sinnott, S-I-N-N-O-T-T, decided by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 2011 at 612 PA 321, the Supreme Court held, and this was a unanimous opinion of all of the justices of Pennsylvania Supreme Court, there was no dissent, that other factors that may be a reason for the person's commission of the offense does not rule out the possibility that there is ethnic intimidation. In other words, you can have mixed motivations to commit the ethnic intimidate or commit the underlying offense. In this case, it was an assault. The perpetrator was angry at the victim's father and accused her of being illegal immigrants, undocumented, and anyway, but he had his dispute was really with the father, but the father wasn't there when he went to confront the victim, and so he took it out on the victim, the daughter, and so there was an underlying issue between him and the father over employment issues, and the court said that just because he had another reason to be carry out some criminal assault against the daughter does not rule out the fact that there was ethnic intimidation or there was a malicious intention toward her based on her, in this case, it was national origin. He was accusing her of being Mexican and undocumented, and even though she was Puerto Rican and a U.S. citizen. So, that is the state of the law at the present time. So that if, and the court held that even though he may have not expressed intentions towards her before, because of course, before going to her house, he didn't know whether the father was home or not. The fact that he expressed these opinions about her during the course of committing the assault, that was sufficient for the court to uphold the ethnic intimidation charges against him and reinstated, because originally what happened was the trial court had found ethnic intimidation. It was reversed by the superior court, saying the original real motivation was the employee-employee relationship and not ethnic intimidation, and the Supreme Court overturned that and restored the ethnic intimidation conviction against him. So it's important to keep all that in mind when looking at the facts of the incident we're going to be talking about today. And so that's basically, what we have as the state of the law as far as Section 2710 of the Criminal Code of Pennsylvania. And that's pretty much, unless there are other questions, that's pretty much what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shiwen. I know that a question has been, what is a hate crime? And so, John, did you want to just share some of the examples that were presented by the DA's office?
Sure, thank you, Anna. The Asian Bar Association of Pennsylvania and Anti-Defamation League and a few others hosted a meeting last month in July. And it was a good representation of law enforcement and government agencies. And one example that I recall is that there was an incident where the defendant hurled a epithet and then threw a water bottle at the victim's car. And that was one example of an incident that was charged with ethnic intimidation. So, and there are a couple other examples as well. So, I think from the community that is wanting to learn and understand at what point defendants who attack Asian Americans because of who we are or because of COVID-19, at what point does the government authorities determine that there is sufficient evidence? So that was an example that was given last month.
Thank you, John. And it looks like Shiwen, did you have a thought here?
Well, my thought goes back to Asian American history, which is that in 1854, the California Supreme Court, in a decision called People versus George Hall, found that the Chinese, because of their ineligibility to citizenship, were excluded from being able to testify against a U.S. citizen for crimes committed against other Chinese, other Asians. And this case, because it then opened the door to the discrimination and attacks, the actual violence against Asian Americans by U.S. citizens, allowed a wave of anti-Asian violence to go on, where the perpetrators really didn't do any, weren't even charged, were not held accountable at any level. And so, when the law enforcement choose not to prosecute perpetrators of these types of crimes, the word gets out, and the perpetrators will take advantage of the fact that they can't be prosecuted. As you may know, or probably don't know, more than 300 Asian Americans were lynched between the 1850s and the early 1900s. And the first major lynching, occurred in 1871 in Los Angeles, where 17 Chinese were lynched. So there are consequences to the failure to prosecute these types of crimes.
Thank you so much, Shiwen. That was extremely helpful context. I know that there are perceptions that, the incident that we will be discussing later today was not a lynching, therefore it is not really a hate crime. And those kinds of misunderstandings are really, important to address, especially if we as Asian American leaders are trying to convince our immigrant community members to cooperate with law enforcement and to report what is happening. So I wanted to move to the next slide just to talk about some of the local activities around how the city is addressing ethnic intimidation. So in 2016, District Attorney Seth Williams, the city solicitor, Sozi Tulante, and Philadelphia Police Commissioner Richard Ross established an ethnic intimidation task force. And, the thinking around that was that, in order to ensure that all members of our community were truly safe, there needed to be cooperation, there needed to be collaboration between these different entities. And the plan was to have the DA's office assign an ADA, Assistant District Attorney, in each of the 6 geographic zones to vigorously prosecute any hate crime. And Yue, could you go to the next slide? In 2017, Mayor Jim Kenney signed Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson's Ethnic Intimidation and Institutional Vandalism Law. So the idea was that, these sort of hate-motivated, vandalism, and at the time it was towards individual headstones that were being vandalized with anti-Semitic language, that would carry more serious penalties. Then Yue, could you tab to the next slide, please? In April of this year, City Council passed a resolution condemning racist and xenophobic rhetoric against Asian and Asian American communities amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. And so in that statement, City Council had said, since March of this year, the online reporting forum, Stop AAPI Hate, has received over 1,100 reports of incidents of racial harassment and discrimination directed at Asian individuals and businesses. Here in Philadelphia, Asian American and Chinese communities in particular have filed complaints, voiced concerns about increasing harassment, threats, and associated with anti-Asian racism. And in these challenging times, each of us must unequivocally speak out against xenophobia and discrimination directed towards any targeted groups. We as Philadelphians support our Asian American, and immigrant communities. Can you tab to the next slide? And on June 24th, District Attorney Krasner did charge a man with ethnic intimidation and assault. In this news article, he's quoted as saying, the video shows a man punching another man. The man throwing the punch, on Marconi Plaza, wearing a Philly shirt. And he repeatedly says to the man who gets hit, who is a journalistic photographer, words to the effect of, get out of here, boy. He says it at least 4 times. And that word used with both its inflection and tone is why the 58-year-old suspect was charged with ethnic intimidation. The victim is black and the suspect is white. And District Attorney Krasner said, when you commit a crime based upon racism or animus that has to do with a marginalized group that they are in, that is an additional crime. So with that said, we wanted to transition to our experts on hate crimes, and we will be hearing from Mrs. Chen later. So first, I would like to call up Robin Burstein. And Robin, I know you mentioned that you have PowerPoint slides, so you may begin sharing your screen.
Great. Let me find it. Slideshow. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction as to what ADL is seeing and what's happening, here on the ground. As John said at the introduction, with the backdrop of coronavirus, a story like this tends to attract multiple forms of hatred. So as one expression of the xenophobia we're seeing, people have given the coronavirus different nicknames like Kung Flu or Winnie the Flu or the China virus or the Wuhan virus. And when people choose to use one of these nicknames linking the virus to China, they are actively othering Chinese people, making them targets and marking them as targets for harassment. There have been memes all over social media. These are only a few of several hundreds we have found, mocking Chinese people, exaggerating habits in a way that also blames them for the outbreak. So on the left, you see a meme that ties the virus to foods that Chinese people might eat, like bat soup. This is one of the oldest conspiracies within the virus, the idea that the virus was transmitted to humans by someone eating bat soup. It's false. And again, by spreading this conspiracy, people are holding China responsible. Another myth is that when Chinese people got the virus, they kept traveling, as depicted in the meme on the right. Again, this isn't true. But by perpetuating this and sharing these kinds of messages across social media, people are blaming China and its people for the spread of the virus. And if you believe that Chinese people caused the virus and are responsible for spreading it, then it's unfortunately not much of a leap to start calling for Chinese people to be actively avoided, even if they're healthy. These images suggest that Chinese people should be feared because of their ethnicity. These hateful messages and conspiracies don't just live online, they're manifesting in the physical space as well. And we're seeing increased reports, like the report we're talking about this morning that happened in Philadelphia of xenophobia in the real world, whether it be people being harassed or tweets. Since January through the end of July, ADL has documented 125 or highlighted 125 incidents that have been reported to us. That is not a comprehensive list. As Anna just said, that Stop AAPI Hate has 1,100 reports since March. And I also am aware that the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council and the Chinese for Affirmative Action organizations also have more comprehensive lists about what is happening across the country. And so what can you do? You know, how do you respond? Respond proportionately and clearly when you witness or learn about an act of bias. Report it if it needs to be reported to the police. If you feel safe, interrupt it, stop it, call the person out, explain to them what they're doing and what they're saying and why it is offensive. You know, what do you want to accomplish? Do you want to educate the person? Speak up, but also assume good intent. You can assume good intent and explain impact at the same time. And when you handle it in a calm and reassuring and educational manner, you have more of an opportunity to make an impact on the person and actually have them realize what they were saying and why it was offensive and not to do it again. So I'm going to stop there and let others continue.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was extremely helpful. Next, we have Rob Busher, president of Japanese American Citizens League, Philadelphia.
Thanks, Anna. Hello, everybody. For those of you who aren't familiar with the JACL, we are the largest and oldest Asian American civil rights group in the country, founded in 1929 by the children of Japanese immigrants. Our local chapter in Philadelphia has been around since the post-war era, when Japanese Americans began resettling in the city of Philadelphia after the forcible eviction and mass incarceration during World War II. I think it's important to contextualize the fact that this latest incident that we're talking about today is not something new here in Philadelphia. We've been seeing anti-Asian incidents happening since February, when coronavirus first became a topic of national concern. I'm sure John can tell you how much the businesses in Chinatown took a hit. I mean, I think it was something like 30% of the usual business for a long time. And I wanted to clarify too, thank you, Robin, for your remarks, but that 1,100 incidents that was reported by Stop API Hate was actually just in the last 2 weeks of March alone. So there have been more than 4,000 incidents that have been reported to date through that same reporting site. And, you know, we need to have this conversation in the context of where do we draw the line? Because if the district attorney's office is not considering this ethnic intimidation, what would be a hate crime offense? In this case, if Ms. Chen was punched in the stomach, would that have counted as a hate crime? The fact is, you know, an 8-month pregnant woman was assaulted on the street. My wife is also 8 months pregnant, and I can only imagine what, you know, that pain and suffering and emotional trauma must be causing her entire family at this moment. I think, you know, to think about this in a broader perspective, we've seen far worse incidents happen, obviously. I mean, there have been people that were stabbed in Texas, the Hmong American family at a Sam's Club. There was a woman in Brooklyn who had an acid attack where she was taking the garbage out. People threw acid at her face. In San Francisco, a bus driver was assaulted by 3 men with a baseball bat for simply asking them to wear their face masks while riding the Mooney bus. It reminds us of another high-profile anti-Asian hate crime, the murder of Vincent Chin, which happened when 2 unemployed auto workers mistook him for being a Japanese man and beat him to death with a baseball bat. When we think about this in Philadelphia, I mean, if we don't take the opportunity to prosecute hate crimes when they occur, we're essentially inviting incidents like this to happen, because it's saying to perpetrators of hate crimes, this isn't bad enough for us to consider it a hate crime. It's also saying to the Asian American community, we don't care enough about you to prosecute this as such. So, you know, I think the last thing that I kind of wanted to draw attention to is with regards to COVID, when we talk about disease scapegoating, this is also something that the Chinese American community has faced essentially since the early anti-Chinese sentiment in the 1870s. And Xu Wen did a great job talking about that. And I think, one of the things for us to keep front of mind is that in that particular incident, that was really part of the inciting reason why the state legislature in California and later the federal government decided to enact anti-Chinese immigration legislation. I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen at this moment in time, but it's important to understand that these same tactics have been used to stoke xenophobic fears against the Chinese community. And that very well may be playing out again, at least in the minds of the individuals who are perpetrating these types of hate crimes. So I think from the Japanese American community perspective and from Asian American community organizers in general, I think we know that enough is enough. And we are asking for law enforcement to take our concerns seriously and prosecute these crimes with the full extent of the law.
Thank you so much, Rob, for your powerful remarks, and appreciate your solidarity and leadership. You've been a consistent voice on these issues, educating and advocate, not just in Philadelphia, but throughout our Commonwealth and also across the country. So thank you so much, Rob, for your remarks. We do have a comment in in the chat box from Jung Tran. So I'll read it out loud. It says, I would like to follow up on Rob Busher's question of if not this, then what, with a modification. If not the words that accompany this assault, then what evidence qualifies as ethnic intimidation? I think we all agree an assault was committed. And what I'm interested in hearing is discussion on how to establish intent, which can be mixed motive or only a reason among several for the assault. So next we have Mrs. Chen. She and her child were the ones who did experience the attack. And we know that there has been some discussion around, speculating about the suspect, her circumstances. We really felt like it was important for Mrs. Chen to share about her experience. So Mrs. Chen, can you unmute your line and just talk a little bit about your experience?
Hello? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So hi, I'm Miss Chen. So what I hear, thank you everybody to share the example of stuff like what's going on and stuff, and I do feel like what happened in the past for me and my daughter, we get attacked. The lady was straight at Asians. Like they was call us a really nasty word, just stuff like that. I really feel like I did what I can. I asked her like that's earlier someone was saying that we should stop them, and they asked them why. I asked the lady, why made you do that? She still used a nasty word back to me and tried to hurt me. So which means I really believe that she is knowing what she was doing, and she are really racist because I am Asian. That's why she's tried to hurt me, even though I'm pregnant and then I have a child with me. So my point is, if that happened, just like recently happened on the street as such a busy street, it could be like other Asian could be hurt as well, being that the lady was trying to attack my child first than me. So I just feel like the court or someone had to help our community to do something, because if Corona is over, a lot of people are hateful, because we can't stop them hateful, because since Corona happened, a lot of people lose their job, anything. They have a lot of stuff. So it could be because they're more hateful to Asian than any other time. So if my child as a teenager walking on the street getting hurt because they are Asian, or any other like people walk to work as because they're Asians, I just feel like the community need to do something. The police need to do something, because we have the same right, and we need to, like, the government or someone had to protect us no matter what, because it's just not fair. And also I just feel so scared being that because being that thing happened, it just cost me like I don't want to go outside because I feel like it's every moment being outside is not safe, and also my child as well. Like yesterday, it was just like Detective Paul gave me a news that she did got charged and she won't get out of jail. You don't even know how happy that my daughter was. She said, "Mom, finally I can go outside. I feel safe." Another way, the DA did not charge her with the charge that we wanted, and I just feel like yesterday if she did get charged with it, I just feel so much relaxed. Like even though I just feel like I got protected. Like for every moment right now, like being around the situation, she's not in jail. It just made me so scared to being outside because I met her the second time when I walked out the door. So it just made me feel like the world can be really small, and if she's a very hateful person and she had to pick somebody like me as Asian and 8 months pregnant, have my 12-year-old with me walking on the street and try to punch me and look at my belly, I'm so scared. I really feel like it just nothing it could be any better than someone will, I don't know, like I just feel like this lady is so much hateful in Asian because she called me and my daughter a fucking Chinese bitch and is in a nasty word. I just feel like it could be worse if she have a weapon next time if you see me on the street, or it could be worse that she may be more hateful being that she in charge right now, she in jail right now. But I just feel like we need to protect it, and I need to I need to protect my family, but also the community people need to protect their family as well. So we need to get an example to the people that you can't do that. If you do that, you're gonna get punished like this. So that way they will stop them and they then do because it just never gonna be better if something happens. Then we are try to do something, it would be too late. What if that day she have a weapon and she kill me and my baby in my belly and just let her go because she just I need the government, I need the police, I need them to do something for me because I just feel like it is unsafe. Being that it's Chinese virus, right? Whatever they were saying, Chinese virus coming, it makes everybody scared already. Now I'm scared to go outside. I'm scared to put kids in school. But if kids like we have to pass Center City to go to school, so I can't pass Center City now because I'm scared because this has happened in Center City. So that's what like. I just feel like we need to do something. The Asian had to do something to connect together and let them know that something will happen if we're not gonna continue doing anything. We ignore them, and it's gonna happen again and again. It's gonna be more people gonna get hurt. Especially she's attacking a kid, so which means she can attack any other people. So we had to get an example. If you do that, then you're gonna get punished with that. Then they will get scared because if it's just gonna be a simple assault, I just feel like you punch me, I like that just because me or you because I'm Asian because you call me fucking Chinese bitch. This is not necessary. Someone will call me. You can call me bitch, but you don't need to call me fucking Chinese bitch. So to me, it's just like she's very clearly she is racist at me because I'm Asian walking on the street. So that's my speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Chen. For first of all, taking time today to reshare your story. I know this has been an extremely traumatizing event for you and your daughter, and it is sad that you have to keep telling your story to get the broader public and leaders to care about what's happening. And so, for those who are not familiar with the case, Mrs. Chen and her daughter were walking down the street at 13th and Chestnut Streets when, they felt something, splash at them. And it was the suspect, who had crossed the street to throw liquid at her child. When they turned around, to kind of confront the person, she threw more liquid, drenching their face masks with unknown liquid. And Mrs. Chen had asked, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? And this person was yelling the expletive. And Mrs. Chen said, well, what are you going to do? I'm pregnant. And the person said, so what? And punched her in the face. And so, we know that maybe we really appreciate 6ABC for reporting on this. It's just surprising that this story hasn't gotten much more attention, which is why we're having this community meeting. When I spoke with Mrs. Chen, she had said, well, does the law not apply to us because people don't think we're Americans who have the same rights as other people? So we really appreciate that law enforcement, District Attorney Krasner are here today. I did want to ask Councilmember Squilla to speak a little bit, and then followed by Congressmember Dwight Evans.
Thank you, Anna, and I appreciate your advocacy on this point. When we first reached out, when we heard about it, reached out to Ms. Chen, she was really very upset about it, and we sort of assured her that the authorities would take this and the police would investigate, get as much information as possible, and then charges would be filed. The part about it was we did, and I know District Attorney Krasner is on the line. We did send an email to him on this to reevaluate it and look at it. I know there was some issues or concerns about a previous contact or something that we didn't know about, and we found out later that it never happened. But as from council's point of view, is that there's no room for hate in the city of Philadelphia at all. And the only way we could spread that message is by making sure that the people who commit these type of crimes are charged with those crimes and then prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And unless we do that, we're sort of sending the signal that it would be okay to do this type of behavior. So, we're in full support of this charge, and we're in full support of making sure that the rest of the public know. And it's really important to have people understand that if you do commit a crime, and in the context of that crime, do something against their race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, that it will not be tolerated, especially here in the city of Philadelphia. And so it's real important to continue the fight to make sure the proper charges are placed and to keep everyone abreast of what's going on. Because if this could happen to Ms. Chen, it could happen to anybody in the city of Philadelphia. And so, we strongly support that. You saw previous resolutions in council, and we will continue to advocate. And it's true. I mean, not many people seem to know it. There was a little story in the paper about it. And if it wasn't brought to actually our attention through Chinatown, John Chen and Anna Perng and PCDC, we would have never even heard about it. So I appreciate your advocacy. Continue this fight. We will continue to fight with you, alongside of you, to make sure the right thing is done here. And I'm sure hopefully after this meeting is done, we will have better results.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Squilla. It feels like, PCDC, you and I are having to convene these repeated community meetings, but you show up every single time, and your participation and support, your immediate outreach to Mrs. Chen as a Chinatown resident has really meant a lot to all of us. I wanted to ask if Congressmember Dwight Evans could unmute his line and just provide a comment. Thank you.
Asian lives matter. Asian lives matter. It is important to stand up and show purposeful support collectively. We happen to be in that kind of time where we desperately need each other. And I want to stress that, because on the federal level, we also have had various resolutions passed. We have sent messages. But I say that personally because of my involvement. I know a number of you on the phone. I've been involved consistently. Why? Because it is important. It is important that you know that someone on the federal level is there with you. So when I say Asian lives matter, it is a reality. It is something that we need to make sure that everyone in this city, this state, and this country knows and aware of that. So I joined this conversation. as I have in the past with you whenever you have called. And whenever I can be, I'm going to be there personally. I think there's one staff person on the line, but that's not important. I want you to know that, and I appreciate that. Whenever you call, and John, Chen, and the rest of them say, yeah, always been there. So again, thank you very much here.
Thank you so much, Congressmember Dwight Evans. We know that you have been so busy, addressing the coronavirus pandemic, advocating to make sure our community gets the resources we need. Over the past year, you've really shown up for us, every single time that there are community concerns. And we have no doubt that you are a champion for Chinatown, for all the residents in your district. So thank you so much for your leadership. We are so appreciative. Next, I wanted to ask State Representative Mary Isaacson if she would like to provide some comments.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And I very much appreciate this dialogue that you've put together. As always, this community tries to stand together to make sure that your voices are collectively heard and that you have proper representation and a voice. And I'm glad that you brought us all to the table to have this conversation and to continue this, and certainly having the proper authorities on here with us so that they can hear the concerns of the community and that we can all work together to move forward and try and stop this outright racism that's going on and denounce it at every turn that we can. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, State Representative Isaacson. You have been a champion for this district, and it's very sad, but Mrs. Chen and the child attends a local elementary school, and that's an entire school community that has learned about this incident. And I know that you have been an advocate for that school community. And so I know that you care as someone who is thinking about just the ripple effects even beyond Chinatown. So I really appreciate you joining and listening today. So we wanted to, give an opportunity for our wonderful members of law enforcement who have joined us today. District Attorney Larry Krasner has been on the line listening, and District Attorney Krasner has had a difficult job of transitioning from a tenure of where there was distrust in law enforcement with the District Attorney's office. He's been supportive of folks who have wanted to see reform, and so there are members of this AAPI community gathered here today who are supporters of Black Lives Matters, who support criminal justice reforms and appreciate your efforts to decarcerate, our city. And at the same time, I think there are a lot of questions. And while you may not want to comment on this case specifically, we wanted to give you an opportunity to speak. So if you could unmute your line, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate it. Please call me Larry. We don't need to have titles and all that stuff. First of all, I want you to know how much I appreciate your organizing, and I'd say that to all of you who organized this session, so we could have this conversation. I do not believe that anything gets done unless people are direct with each other and they explain to each other what their thoughts are. I'm going to try to be mindful that there may be translation. So if I'm pausing here and there, it's for the translator. First of all, a few general comments, if I may. In a moment, I'm going to explain to you the several ethnic intimidation cases that we have brought during this administration. And I'm going to explain a little bit about all of the ethnic intimidation cases that we have brought where the victims were Asian Pacific Americans, because we have done that repeatedly. And I'm also going to talk to you about our thinking around this case, because it is a little different. But I do want you to understand, before I make some general comments, that we take your concerns very seriously, that when you charge a case, you are not necessarily stuck with that charge if moving forward you find there is a good reason for another charge to be there. And everything that you're saying here today is a request that we reconsider, and we will consider everything that you're saying here today. All right? But let me speak a little bit more generally first, if I may. The legacy and the history of oppression of Asian Pacific Americans and of Chinese Americans specifically is atrocious. I am grateful that you have provided these reminders, although I am certainly familiar with much of it. There's no excuse for any of that. Obviously, Asian Pacific Americans are not alone in having been oppressed in the United States and around the world. But it is a terrible history. It is a terrible legacy. And we recognize that. The second thing that we recognize is that these are hateful times. And what I mean by that is that the President of the United States, perhaps more than any president in my lifetime, divides people and he foments hate. And he has especially focused during the period of the pandemic, he has especially focused on using hatred of Asian Pacific Americans. He does it every day. You're all familiar with his phrases about the Kung flu, the Wuhan virus, the Chinese virus, all this kind of stuff. He was even doing it yesterday when I heard him. He does other things. He has been very close to a lot of hate groups and white supremacist groups in different ways, some of whom have a whole list of groups of people they hate. He does it deliberately, and he also does it in related ways, such as his extreme anti-immigrant positions. As you may know, I have stood against this president loudly and proudly for his hateful rhetoric, for his threats to take over Philadelphia, for his continuing tactic of dividing. And I have also, simply in my public capacity, been public about groups like the Proud Boys, which is a white supremacist group that is making efforts to infiltrate the Philadelphia Police Department, as white supremacist groups often do. It was not long ago, in fact, only the last few weeks, when I had people electronically harassing me over things I have said on these points, and that is not the first time that has happened. It has happened a year or two ago when there was desecration of cemeteries in St. Louis and in Philadelphia, and there were some very concerted efforts to get at me as a result. I am no fan of hate. And I think this administration has proven in various ways that we are no fans of hate either. One of them is that we have had the most pro-immigrant and most immigrant-friendly policy ever in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. We have had the partnership, in many ways, of the mayor, in terms of both the DA's office and the mayor refusing to sign another contract with ICE that would result in information on people who were just arrested and who are undocumented being quickly and easily turned over to ICE. I wouldn't do it, the mayor wouldn't do it, and it's the first time in 10 years that has occurred. We have also, in this office, opened a unit for the first time in Philadelphia DA history, which is specifically to address the needs of immigrants. We've done this for a very important reason, and also a selfish reason. We like to win cases. We need to have people who are immigrants and are victims come forward and testify. We need to have witnesses who are immigrants and may have concerns about their immigration status come forward to testify. Not just for other immigrants, but for everyone. If we did not do that, then we would be supporting the president in creating a whole category of people who are afraid to call the police or I should say more afraid, because let's be honest, there are a lot of undocumented people in Philadelphia, including Asian Pacific Americans, who even now, even with the police department trying to do the right thing, even with the DA's office trying to do the right thing, remain afraid. We made a decision, and I stand by that decision, that we needed to make it possible for immigrants, for people who are undocumented to come forward and to enjoy the assistance of law enforcement and the court system. We also made a decision we needed to be fair to defendants who are immigrants. So for that reason, we hired an immigration attorney who works here full time and comes in my office on a regular basis to seek my signature on documents that have the potential to protect immigrants who are assisting with the prosecution, or comes in my office to talk about whether there might be a more fair way to address a defendant on a non-serious case. We do that. But we have done more than that. Any suggestion that we have not been willing to bring ethnic intimidation charges where we felt they were fully supported by the law is inaccurate. In the year 2018, we brought 5 different cases where the victims were Asian Pacific Americans. It involved 3 total incidents. In one, there were 3 victims. In the other 2, there were not. And the names of those cases are Commonwealth versus Francis Connor, Commonwealth versus Stephen King, Commonwealth versus Felicia Brown. We also brought 5 transcripts involving Black victims. And by transcript, I mean cases. We brought 4 involving white victims, 2 with Latinx victims, 1 involving ethnic intimidation around that person's religion, and 1 involving another type of group. In 2019, we also brought these kinds of cases. We brought a total of 19 cases involving ethnic intimidation. One of those cases was Commonwealth versus Robert Boone, where the victim is an Asian Pacific American. In 2020, the courts closed in the middle of March, and they have been closed now for months in terms of doing trials. But even in 2020, we have brought 5 cases involving ethnic intimidation. So the record should be very clear, even though we did not have a town hall when we brought all these cases involving victims who are Asian Pacific Americans. The record should be very clear that, number 1, we do bring ethnic intimidation cases where we believe the law supports it. And number 2, we do bring ethnic intimidation cases where the victims are Asian Pacific Americans. That is our record. So I'm sure the question then becomes, why did you not bring it here? Let me see if I can talk to you about that. And I do want you to understand that smart people can sometimes honestly disagree. That may be the situation. It may also be a situation where, based upon new evidence or a review of the law, we reconsider what we're doing. We are happy for all the input that we have gotten today. But let me talk to you a little bit about this through a couple of different lenses. First of all, it's important to understand what criminal court is. I heard someone say we have to stop racism. Yes, we do. We have to denounce it. Yes, we do. But not everything we want to stop and not everything we want to denounce is a crime. It is not a crime to be a racist. It is not a crime to say something that is a racial epithet. It is not a crime, usually, to have a car accident, even if that car accident may kill someone. None of us want car accidents where people die. None of us support racial epithets or racism, but our criminal law is not there to punish everything we don't like. It is very specifically there to punish certain crimes. In this case, we have brought a total, well, I should actually say in these two cases, because what we have done here is we have filed one case for Mrs. Chen, and we have filed one case for her daughter. And in each of those cases, we've brought more than one charge. We have brought two charges of simple assault, which is a second-degree misdemeanor. We have brought two charges of reckless endangerment of another person, also a second-degree misdemeanor, and we have brought harassment. So we have brought 5 charges. What this meeting is about is whether we should have brought one more misdemeanor charge, because ethnic intimidation under these circumstances would be a misdemeanor. That's really the issue before you. Our office has also managed to do something that's pretty difficult, which is to incarcerate someone on misdemeanor charges. It's extremely difficult to do, but it has something to do with the background of this defendant, and the background of this defendant has something to do with the decision that we have made so far. There is abundant evidence that this defendant is mentally ill, homeless, and that she was in fact panhandling shortly before this incident occurred. By which I mean she was begging for money on the street. It is my understanding, although I haven't seen this part, that there is video evidence of this woman at the location, which is closer to Walnut Street actually, but there's abundant evidence that this woman was out there and was panhandling shortly before the incident occurred, including video. We do not have video of the incident. This is not the first contact that the defendant has had with the law. She has a previous assault case. It was an assault case in which she was accused of assaulting a police officer, I believe by biting that police officer. The circumstances of that case were that the officer was trying to remove her from a SEPTA location, apparently because she was going to sleep there or stay there. And during his efforts to try to remove her, she became agitated. She bit him. That man is a white male. And as a consequence of that incident, after careful consideration, 2 things happened. Number one, she refused to give her name. She was actually identified as Jane Doe, which is the phrase that is used when someone's identity is not known. Number 2, the case was put into mental health court. The standards for a criminal matter to end up in mental health court are pretty high. There has to be a clear record of mental illness involved. So as we talk about this case, and as we compare it to other cases, it is important for you to understand that there's a clear and documented record of mental illness on the part of this person. That is one of several factors that we considered, and that is one of a number of factors that make it slightly different than some of these other cases. Second, I think you should know that because of the attention you have brought to the case, I have not only seen the news interview with Mrs. Chen, but I have also reviewed her videotaped interview with police about exactly what occurred during the incident. There are some slight differences, but they are in general consistent. What they describe is similar, but not identical to what you heard here today, which is essentially that Mrs. Chen is walking with her child, that she does not see where the defendant comes from, although she explains that the defendant's bag was on the sidewalk across the street, which would be consistent with a homeless person panhandling. And the defendant came up and tossed water on her daughter first, then her. At which point, according to Mrs. Chen, she verbally engaged with this woman, asking or demanding to know why she had done that. And the woman stated, because you're Ann, depending on which interview, it's either Asian bitch or Chinese bitch. Depending on the interview, it's either an epithet, it's either not an epithet, but it's either the word fucking or not. Okay. And according to Mrs. Chen stated, you're one too. The woman who was walking away returned, stared at Mrs. Chen, and then according to Mrs. Chen, she said to the woman, what are you going to do? Punch me? And according to Mrs. Chen, the woman looked at her pregnant belly for a moment and then punched her once in the temple, walked across the street, got her bag, and went. None of that is okay. It is, in fact, an assault, reckless endangerment, harassment. But the question that has to be answered, if we are doing law and not doing politics, and I am interested in doing law, not politics, the question that has to be asked is whether or not there is at least probable cause to show that the motivation here was racial animus as opposed to something else, in light of the circumstance of a woman who is panhandling and has severe mental illness coming into this kind of conflict. I think that smart people and honest people and fair people might have different opinions on it. So let me switch to another point, which is there was a specific request, I think, for us to compare this to a case on Marconi Plaza, one of the several cases that I've already indicated to you where this office has brought an ethnic intimidation case. That was a case involving an approximately 35-year-old journalistic photographer who was at Marconi Plaza, and he was doing his job. He was taking photographs of some people who were walking around with baseball bats in a kind of a heated environment. There is a video of that incident, and what it specifically shows is multiple statements that were obviously of a racial nature against someone who was not interacting with him at all, before the man we charged punched that photographer in the head. More specifically, what the video shows is that the photographer is just doing his thing. He is not in an argument with anyone. He is just doing his thing. And this man says, "Get out of here, boy. Get out of here, boy. Get out of here, boy. Get out of here, boy," before throwing a punch at that person. That is not one statement. That is four statements. It is not one statement during the course of verbal interchange back and forth. And the punch is thrown by someone who has no record of mental illness. It is a case in which, because of the repetition, because of the phrase used against an African American who's about 35 years of age, 4 times, boy, because of the sequence of the interaction, and because of the lack of a mental health record, there is stronger evidence to support that charge. In fact, if we look at the cases where we have brought ethnic intimidation involving Asian Pacific American victims, such as Commonwealth versus Francis Connor, Commonwealth versus Stephen King, Commonwealth versus Felicia Brown, Commonwealth versus Robert Boone, it is a fair statement that the summary given earlier about what Michael C. Lee, who is a prosecutor in my office and also an Asian Pacific American, the summary attributed to him is not accurate. The details of that case, of those cases, are far more serious than the summaries that were provided. Frankly, those summaries are misrepresenting the reality of those cases. So,
Krasner, I apologize for interrupting you. There's someone, who in the chat box has, raised a couple of questions. And, I serve on the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities, and we just wanted to say throughout your remarks, you have continued to raise the suspect's mental health disability as a possible reason for physical violence. People with disabilities are more likely to be crime victims than perpetrators of crime. And advocates are very concerned around conflating mental health illness with racism or even violence, which contributes to stigma. So I apologize for interrupting you, but you've been stating repeatedly that this case is different because the person has a mental health disability. And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that as a commissioner on the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities, that is not a view shared by the commission. We have to be really careful, especially with members of the community here and members of the press, that this is the DA's official position. But I really thank you for explaining and going through, why you feel that these are different situations. And thank you for...
No, sorry, that's not going to work. You're going to have to let me answer that. You are totally misrepresenting what I was saying with reference to this person's mental illness. And I say that as someone who has repeatedly represented people who have mental illness. In criminal court, any criminal attorney will tell you that the existence or non-existence of mental illness is a factor to consider when you're trying to answer the question of motivation. And the issue we're talking about here, very specifically with ethnic intimidation, is to understand that person's motivation. The reference to mental illness, the reference to the fact that the court has determined this person should be in mental health court, which is specifically for people who have mental illness, is also a factor that is consistent with a prior arrest for assault against someone who is not Asian Pacific American. It's also consistent with the status of being homeless and panhandling. So that is the context in which it has been represented. And I must tell you, I think it's troubling that you would take those statements and completely misrepresent what I was saying.
No, I'm just reporting to you what someone sent via the chat as a concern. So there's other people who are concerned about that. And maybe, there was a misunderstanding here. But thank you for clarifying that you were just referring to the suspect's prior record and how the criminal court handles people who have mental health disabilities. There are community members here who have been waiting to ask questions. We only have about 8 minutes left. So I wanted to give folks a chance to ask questions if possible. We were expecting Chief Inspector Cynthia Dorsey. I don't see her listed as a participant right now. So I wanted just to allow members of the community who've been waiting, to speak.
Hello. I am listed as Santi. I am Chief Inspector Dorsey. I have been here since the beginning. I am sorry for the mix-up.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. We didn't recognize you.
Yes.
We had listed you on the agenda, which was shared with both of your offices, just to allow, Philadelphia police to comment.
Well, I am, happy to hear all of these perspectives. And the Philadelphia Police Department, we take these things seriously. I have been working with the Asian community roughly since, or on a professional level, as a police officer when I was a police captain in 1998. And so, up until now, I have been involved. And I have been working with the Asian American community, the Pcdc, also APABA, and also the Human Relations Commission and other entities and organizations to make sure at the advent of COVID, when we began to hear these complaints, that the police department was sensitized to them. We have policies. Language is an issue as far as people knowing what is available to them. People that are not proficient in English, everyone has rights, and so we take it seriously. And when I heard this case, I believe Randy Duque is the one from the Human Relations, Philadelphia Human Relations. I thought that it was very, very serious. What happens after that is when the police respond, the police officer who responds takes an initial report. And then the initial report, I thought that it should have gone to the detectives. So the detective bureau did an investigation. And what we do during those investigations is, we look and see if there's any camera footage. We interview the complainants. We interview the victims. We try to find witnesses, and we canvass the areas. And that's what we did. And after there's an investigation, we make a determination on what we think what crime fits. And so then we refer them to the district attorney's office they're the ones that decide charging. So what I can't do, because I'm not a detective anymore, I don't investigate crimes, is I can't say specifically, what charge should have been. But on the face of it, what I heard and what I was told, and as far as what the victims, the victim statement and what was said to the victim and done to the victim, then we handled it as a hate crime. That's the way we handled it. And so then the criminal justice system is a process. It goes from the police. We usually is initiated by the police, and then we go and submit it to the district attorney's office, which reviews the charges, and then probably to a court of law. And so, but we are working. I would like for us, I've heard some people mention outreach. I believe that we have worked with the Asian American community, educated them, given them resources. But, however, what I think needs to be done on our end, on my end as well, is we need to work together to let the community at large know what ethnic intimidation is, know what hate crimes are, know what bias incidents are, and know what is going on and what the Asian Pacific American community is experiencing. I believe that these individuals who perpetrate these crimes are the exception instead of the rule. I believe that Philadelphia is a city of love. It is not, we do not, as a people, and I'm speaking not as a police officer, but as a resident of Pennsylvania and of Philadelphia, we do not tolerate hate. We live together, we work together, we do commerce together, we go to school together. And I believe that the more people who are educated about this issue, the Asian Pacific American community is not alone. You have my support, and I believe that the majority of Philadelphians and people in Pennsylvania have your support. So I think that I need to go back, and we need to go back, and we need to get that message out to everyone in Philadelphia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Inspector Dorsey. We know that you have been a wonderful and strong advocate for our community, you know, serving as a liaison for our Philadelphia Asian American Police Advisory Group. So we truly appreciate the work that you have continuously done because it is about relationship building. It's about trust building. And I want to especially acknowledge, you know, Detective Paul Gariccio, who's on this line, who has, you know, is on a first name basis with Mrs. Chen. You know, this discussion has really highlighted the need for community building within our communities. But, you know, we also want to make sure that the voices of the people who are really impacted, who are closest to the issues, such as Mrs. Chen and her child, are not lost. I wanted to ask Jung Tran from Asian Pacific American Bar Association. She had a question or a remark.
Hi, thank you, Anna. And I really appreciate having this forum so that all these different parties can come together and share information and think about how to move forward with this incident and the broader issues that this incident represents. And so I'm president of the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Pennsylvania, and we have been working since about February with a lot of different government agencies and law enforcement on the issue of hate crimes. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am to our partners in the community, in the police, and the district attorney's office for sharing their experience, their expertise, helping to educate us on what is the law, how, what kinds of conduct can be held accountable under the law, what is not held accountable. You know, that's all important background information. So what I've learned on this meeting that I wanted to follow up on is I think it is important who is the defendant? Where is she coming from? How does any sort of mental illness play into the decision, the analysis of whether an ethnic intimidation charge is warranted? So I am interested in learning more about how are defendants with mental illness treated? Are they treated consistently across the board? What is the district attorney's office role in if a defendant does have this factor, is it the role of that defendant to raise this as a response to a charge, or is it the district attorney's office role to play out all possible scenarios and make a decision whether to file the charge or not? So I'm interested in learning more information about that. And then my other comment, because I know we are out of our time, is how this case is treated, how the victim is valued, protected, listened to, her concerns heard. This is going to have broader consequences. This is probably, I think we can think of this as a representative case. So how this case plays out will have ripple effects in the community. A lot of people are watching, and the Asian Bar and a lot of other concerned organizations have really tried to send a message into the community of what is a hate crime. And it's a broader definition than I think a lot of people originally thought. So we've spent a lot of effort into doing that educational work. We've asked people to really report these crimes to the police, to the district attorney's office, to the Human Relations Commission, and not just assume that nothing will be done, that people won't be protected. We've talked about how a hate crime can be not just an assault, but a threat of an assault. And so I'm concerned that if this case is perceived as being handled in a way that does not respect the victim, that message will be weakened and our efforts will not have the effect that we want. So I just want to remind people that this is about more than Mrs. Chen and her daughter, and they represent a lot of people who are feeling not protected, not safe. and what we do will have a reverberation out in the community. And thank you for the opportunity, Anna, to add my comments.
Thank you so much. And we are at time, so I wanted to turn it over to John Chen.
I want to thank everybody for participating in this meeting and discussion. I know that 90 minutes, there's not enough time based on the chatter in the chat box. I think people have a lot of feelings about this and have a lot to say. I'm just happy that we had some experts come on to present some professional views on this issue of hate crimes and ethnic intimidation. I do want to thank District Attorney Krasner for joining us as well. I think his comments are causing people to have a lot of questions, which we cannot all address at this time. It's important that I think this conversation continue. There were even comments about people of color working together. I think that's definitely something we can all support, and I think it makes sense. But I think there's two very separate issues here. There's one issue where there's been a victim of a crime, and who is Mrs. Chen and her child. And based on what authorities have presented to this Asian community over the last 8 to 10 months, and even before that, it's inconsistent, what we've been told and what is happening. There's an inconsistency. So that has not been reconciled today and probably needs further conversation. Secondly, there's been brought into this conversation this overall moment that we are all living in, where is this drive and demand for social justice and righting wrongs, which we all support as well. But I believe that these two issues are being conflated, and the expectations of Mrs. Chen, who is a resident, Philadelphia resident, and a member of our community, the question is she receiving the same equal rights as an Asian American as any other person under the law? And secondly, there is an issue of people being victimized by the system. There's no doubt about that. But I see this as two very separate issues, and two issues that we both can work to resolve. And they're not, and they should not be treated as one issue that's mixed together, because it's really unfair for the victim to be asked to, I guess, defer and be treated differently because of the situation. So those are my comments. And again, we need more discussion about this, and we will have further discussion about this. Thank you.
Thank you again to all of our speakers who joined us today. We really appreciate your time. We're ending the meeting. Thanks again.